Am I slightly nervous about making an unpopular opinions video on the internet as a person who is definitely like a pathological people pleaser? Yes. But you know what? Maybe we're just gonna file this under growth exercise. Hi, hello. My name is Allie. I'm an independent graphic designer coming to you from just outside Toronto, and this is my channel where I talk about my knitting, how it's going, and what it's costing me. Today we're going to be talking unpopular knitting opinions, or I guess more realistically, maybe not unpopular so much as just controversial. Like, I don't think I'm in a tiny minority on a lot of these, but I do think that there will be people who disagree for sure. Now, I always tell you what tea I'm drinking, but it feels extra relevant today since I'm kind of gonna spill some. So today I'm drinking the Sloan Classic Earl Grey out of my mug from Studio 648, which is a little ceramic shop based in Ontario. And as for what I'm wearing today, it is warm today. Yesterday we had my first ever thunder snowstorm. I have never in my 31 and a half years of life witnessed such a thing. Yay, climate change, new fun, exciting frontiers. And today it's hot out. So that's interesting. But as a result, I'm wearing my Sailor Swift top by Veronica Lindbergh. This pattern accommodates up to a 59.5-inch bust. And I knit this at like the very end of last summer. So it didn't really get a chance to be worn through the summer. So in terms of cost per wear, this one is still pretty high because I've only worn this 5 times since I finished it. I didn't really get wear out of it through the winter by layering the way that I kind of thought/hoped that I might. So right now, since this top cost me $55 Canadian to knit and I've worn it 5 times, that puts us at a current cost per wear of $11 Canadian per wear, which I'm hoping is going to be a lot lower by the end of the summer, but we will see. Now, before we get into hot takes, I want to let you know that this video is sponsored by Unraveled. Unraveled is a small family-owned business based out of Australia that sells knitting kits that are appropriate for knitters of all levels, whether you're a total beginner or someone more advanced. And their projects are geared toward allowing you to access the sort of rhythmic, therapeutic, very mindful nature of knitting, what a lot of us come to knitting for, especially in times when we're feeling stressed. My kit from them is on the way as we speak, and I'm really excited to get started on my essential blanket. It looks like new color options are popping up all the time, so if you don't see something that suits you right now, it's definitely worth checking again. And if the blanket's not for you, there are lots of other options, including patterns from designers that you would recognize, like Petite Knit or Jessie Made Designs. Their kits use Peruvian alpaca yarn, and I asked what they could tell me about the sourcing of their yarn. And the suppliers that they work with are Responsible Alpaca Standard certified, which means that they are held to a very high standard as far as the animal welfare practices that they adhere to, which is something that's really important to me in purchasing products that are animal derived. So if you're interested in knitting an essential blanket along with me this spring or any of their other kits, you can get 10% off your order if you go to unraveled.store/AllieMakesEverything. Okay, let's get into these controversial opinions. So number one, let's start with a hot button issue. Screw the Sophie Scarf. I simply don't understand. And I want to be very clear, if you have knit and love the Sophie Scarf, this is not a shot at you. If you enjoyed knitting it and you're enjoying wearing it, amazing. I'm so happy for you. Where are you? Tell me about you, because here is my experience with the Sophie Scarf sort of in the world at large. And to be clear, this is not actually just about the Sophie Scarf. It's just about everything that belongs in that sort of like micro scarf, neck scarf territory. I simply don't see anyone wearing these ever outside of like a finished object video. I'm just confused. Like, when are you guys wearing these? Because I'm not seeing it happen, which doesn't mean it's not happening, but I'm having a really hard time believing that it's happening. And like, it's not that I don't think that it's cute, but I think it's cute in such a like specific, quirky kind of way that what I think is happening is that I think that the Sophie Scarf is the quirky girl's beret of the contemporary knitting world, which is to say, we see it on Pinterest, we think it looks so cute, we aspire to be the girl that wears that. One day we finally acquire the beret, not once do we step out of the house with it on. That's just what my impression is of the Sophie Scarf. I have only ever seen it on a human body on knitting YouTube. Like, not one single time in my actual life have I actually seen someone wear a small knit scarf. And truthfully, I can't even think of having seen them on someone on knitting YouTube outside of a video where they're like actively talking about having made this scarf. Like, I can 100% understand the appeal of it from a making perspective. Like, it is a good way to use up a small quantity of yarn. It's very simple. You can finish it very quickly. So there's a lot of sort of immediate gratification. When you really need a quick project, it's like a pick-me-up. Like, I get all that. My question is like, then what? It just kind of feels to me like this weird conspiracy where like we're all pretending that we're all wearing these little scarves, but no one actually is. I'm just really confused by it. And I just know that it wouldn't fit into my personal style, so I don't feel any need to make one for myself. But I just would love to hear from the people for whom it does fit into your style and that you've made one. Like, are you wearing it? Tell me about wearing it, because I'm not seeing it happen. And I'm just so confused every time I see the 500th person making a Sophie scarf, because like, where did they go? It's like so many have been made, and then where did they all go? Okay, controversial opinion number 2, learn to knit with metal needles. And I don't mean by that you need to learn to knit with metal needles. I feel like I just see so much like beginners need to learn to knit with wood needles because it's grippier, it's so much better. And I just, like, if you're learning to knit and you're having this problem, then like for sure, I think that seeking out wood needles could help mitigate that problem. But I also think that for many, many people learning to knit, there's probably someone in your life who has knitting needles, possibly even just collecting dust in a closet, that you could use instead of having to buy your own needles just to learn, just to get started. And there's a very high chance that those aren't going to be wood needles, particularly if you're borrowing from someone who's been knitting a long time and doesn't need or want the extra grippiness. And I don't think you should shy away from trying to learn to knit just using what's available to you. Like, I learned to knit using my grandmother's plastic needles, and then I bought myself a set of metal needles. I had never used wood needles until I bought some just so that they wouldn't be confiscated at airports in other countries when I was traveling. Like, I don't think it necessarily makes that big of a difference. I'm sure that it can for some people, and it probably also depends how loose or how tightly you knit. But I feel like there's a lot of, I mean, this is a strong word, but I want to say like a fear-mongering around metal needles where like, it's not that serious. Like, it's not that different. Like, at the end of the day, they're all just like round sticks that you're like poking yarn around, right? Like, it's not, they're not that different. And if what you have available to you is not a wood needle, I don't think you need to go buy wood needles. Maybe you'll try what you have available, decide you don't like it, and then go buy wood ones. That's fine, but just like, I think it's worth trying. And even if, say, you don't have someone around you who you can borrow stuff from, if you're just going to like a Goodwill trying to save money, pick it up as cheap as you can, I think you're probably going to find a lot more like old plastic straight needles, because that's what so many of our grandmothers used. And again, I think that for most people learning, like, that's fine. Okay, number 3, bottom-up patterns are simply not worth it. Not to me. It's way too important to me to be able to try things on as I go and have a true sense of how it's going to fit. And you just cannot get that in the same way with a bottom-up pattern, because so much comes down to the shoulder area and how that fits you and exactly how open the neckline is and all of these things. And like, of course you can get a good idea from a swatch, and I do swatch. I think it's important to swatch, but a swatch cannot tell you everything. A swatch is just a small sample, and sometimes there are really minute differences in a swatch that you can't really tell are there at all, but magnified over a whole garment start to become noticeable. Or sometimes fabric just starts behaving differently under its own weight, right? Like, by the time you've got the whole length of a sweater, that yarn is just hanging more than your swatch ever was, right? To me, bottom-up patterns are just such a gamble that I think for me it would need to be a pattern that I'm like absolutely obsessed with and has a decent amount of flexibility in how it fits, including in terms of length, in order for it to feel worth tackling to me, because there's just too much that I can't know until the very end, and I'm just not interested in setting myself up for that kind of disappointment. Like, I have knit bottom-up patterns before, and while some of those garments are garments that I love for certain aspects about them, there are also things about them that irritate me, usually related to the length, which is the part that's the hardest to gauge correctly when knitting bottom-up. So it's just not worth it. Okay, number 4, different designers are allowed to write their patterns differently, and if their way of writing it is not for you, that's not their problem. Like, I think it's 100% true that different people learn and process information in different ways, and that different people are going to need different things in a knitting pattern to be able to enjoy following it and understand what's going on and make that pattern successfully. But I don't think that it's reasonable to put all of that expectation on the designer to have a written version of the pattern, a charted version of the pattern, a full set of schematics for the pattern, and a video tutorial for the pattern. I just think that this is a way in which some people are asking way too much of someone who in most cases is not making very much money for the amount of labor that goes into producing these things. And I think that, like, as people knitting patterns, we need to be able to apply the discernment of what kind of patterns do we need and who is producing patterns in that style and looking there. Because also, like, there's very little truly original in the world of knitting, right? Like, this is a craft that's been around for so long. There's so much overlap between so many patterns. Like, if there's a pattern you really like that is instructed in a format that you know doesn't work super well for you, I highly suspect that it's possible to find a very similar pattern instructed in a way that does work for you. And I can understand a level of disappointment, right, if you get attached to a particular pattern and it's not instructed in the way that works best for you. But to me, to hold that against the designer is kind of akin to criticizing an author for writing in language that you don't enjoy, right? Like, for example, there would be people who might read Jane Austen and be like, this language is too elaborate. I find it really hard to get into or to understand what's going on. I can't read this book. And that's reasonable to have that take on it. At the same time, the people who love Jane Austen love her writing for those same things, right? People produce things in their own style. You do not want a pattern designer who is amazing at producing written patterns to be doing video pattern walkthroughs. They're probably going to be bad videos. Like, that's not their thing. That's not what they're here to do. Like, in the same way that different authors are suited to different readers, I think it's okay that different pattern designers, I think, can also be suited to different knitters. Like, I think it's just not reasonable to expect a pattern designer to produce instructions of their pattern in every single possible format you could imagine, when even just putting out a regular written pattern takes so much. Like, you have to figure out your own design, like do your own test knitting. You have to maybe knit extra samples. You have to get tech editing. You have to arrange a test knit. You have to adjust things based on feedback from the tech editor and the test knit. Like, there's so many dozens, if not hundreds of hours that can go into producing a knitting pattern in just one format. I think that it's the pattern designer's responsibility to provide a clear pattern in whatever form of instruction they've chosen to give, to make sure that it is well tested and tech edited and error-free, and to make it clear to the buyer in the place where the buyer would be looking to purchase the pattern exactly what form that instruction takes, so that the buyer can make an informed decision about whether this pattern is a good fit for them. Like, I do not think that anyone should be having to buy a pattern to find out the specifics of how the pattern is going to be instructed. I think that should be really clear on the Ravelry page or the Etsy page or wherever it is that this pattern is sold. Just don't think it's really feasible to expect every possible format of a pattern in something you can download for like $7.99. Now, that said, this brings us to controversial opinion number 5. What I do not count as part of that does not give patterns license to not be size inclusive. I know it's more work to grade for more sizes, and I know that that might feel like a really big leap for pattern designers who've been in this business a really long time and have their business model set up a certain way. But I think that the plethora of newer designers, or even ones who've been doing it a long time and just have updated their practices, enough of those people are doing it to show that it is very possible to do. And everybody just deserves to be able to make nice clothes that fit them. Like, full stop. That's all. I don't have a lot to add to that, except maybe that, like, even if this is a thing that you don't care about from a personal angle or an empathetic angle, it's also just good for business. Like, when I launched my merch line at the end of last year with these shirts, shameless self-promo, I, had to do a little bit of extra digging to find t-shirts that met all the criteria I was looking for, including a really broad size range. And guess what? Most of my t-shirt sales have been on the high end of the size range. Because guess what? Lots of people in the world are on the high end of that size range. So I just really don't understand why, when it comes to knitting patterns, it's so often treated as like an exception of like, well, like, I guess we can maybe go whatever way to accommodate like the few people who might need that. Like, according to my sales, it's just good business sense, even if you don't care about it in any other way, which you should. Okay, number 6. I prefer a paid pattern over a free one. And obvious caveat here, that's me coming from the position of like a $7 download is not a financial issue for me. So obviously when a $7 download is more material in your budget, I completely understand that the same train of thought would not apply, and I'm lucky to be in the position where it does apply for me. But the way that I think about this is I have an understanding of how much work goes into a knitting pattern, and not a first-hand one. I've never done it, but I've like looked into the process enough that I feel like I have a sense of the monumental amount of work that it is, which makes me skeptical sometimes of the quality that I can expect from a pattern that's free. I think that there's a lot less like onus on the designer to provide a pattern that is accurate and clear on a free pattern, right? Because like, if you're unhappy with the pattern, like, they don't even have to give you a refund because there's nothing to refund. Like, there's just a lot less incentive for them to make sure that it's a good pattern. And I think that that's also why a lot of patterns are free. I think that a lot of people are interested in designing patterns and want to get into it in a way that is low stakes and not the behemoth of a task that is doing a fully properly vetted knitting pattern. And I respect that endeavor. Like, I think that's great. I think people should be allowed to do that and put out patterns for free that are not like absolutely top-notch patterns. And I think you get what you pay for, kind of. I think it's a little, I was gonna say buyer beware, but like downloader beware, right? I think following a free pattern, you kind of have to be prepared for it to maybe go sideways. And sometimes I'm game to do that for a particular pattern, but most of the time, considering the amount of money that I'm putting into yarn and the amount of time I'm putting into knitting most things, I would just like to be working from a pattern that I'm reasonably confident is reasonably well written. And I just think that sticking to patterns where the designer is actually getting paid for their labor is often a useful way to do that. Okay, number 7, I think we probably need to talk more about the ethics around animal treatment than we actually do. Now, I'm not going to get graphic with any of this, but it's suffice to say that there are some nasty practices that can be involved sometimes in the wool production cycle that I think most of us would be really horrified by if we were standing there watching it happen and then gathering our yarn afterward. And I also understand that sometimes shopping in accordance with your values is just not feasible when you're operating at certain income levels. So this is not me saying that if you don't make enough money to be able to afford to buy this yarn or that yarn, that you shouldn't be knitting. That's not fair. I do think that if you're someone who cares about these things and you do have the disposable income to be able to spend a little bit more to shop in accordance with your values, I think that this is an area that is sometimes overlooked within the knitting niche that might be worth turning more attention toward than a lot of us are currently doing. So if you're entirely new to this topic, you might just want to Google the word mulesing and make sure that you're not on Google Images and just do a little quick read, because there are a lot of yarn brands that can tell you that their yarn is mulesing free, and I think that that is something that is worth looking for. And if you're curious more about the subject, the ethics of yarn in general, Breathing Yarn did a really fantastic video about this that I will link in the description below. I think sometimes this topic just gets overlooked in the broader context of like, ooh, what yarn is a good deal? I think that like with most things in the world, things that are cheap come at a different kind of cost. And in the world of yarn, I think that unfortunately a lot of the time that cost is to the animals that it comes from. And I know most of us would probably be horrified to actually see that in action. Okay, number 8. I actively do not want a stash. And again, this is zero shots fired at anyone who loves having a big stash. This is not about you at all. I just find the idea of a stash it feels like a trap, because like, here's the thing, I'm too picky to be able to buy yarn without a very specific project in mind, because as soon as you have yarn in your collection, it's a specific finite quantity. And so now in order to use this yarn, I now have to be searching within the parameters of patterns that use only that kind of yarn, only that exact amount of yarn. I need to really err on the side of caution. If I can't get this exact yarn again, maybe it's a different dye lot, I don't want to deal with that. Maybe it's just not available at all anymore. Like, I just feel like anytime I find a pattern that I want to make, I'm never going to happen to have the exact right amount of yarn for it. And just the odds of me trying to find a pattern that I really love, because again, picky, that suits exactly what I happen to have, like, it just feels to me like it's making my life so much harder than if I just buy the appropriate yarn for the project that I want to make. And so because I feel like I need to tie yarn so specifically to a project in order to not end up just wasting so much of this yarn, it means that really any yarn that's sitting in my stash is assigned to a theoretical project and therefore becomes this sort of like knitting to-do list for me, which I don't mind, except that I don't want that queue to get too long, or it starts to feel, it does just feel obligatory, right? Because I mean, knitting projects aren't quick. So by the time I get through 2-3 things on my list, do I even still want to knit that 4th thing that was in the queue, you know? Like, have I not found anything in the meantime that I would rather knit instead? And I understand, again, like, if you're a less picky person, it might be very easy to be like, well, yeah, obviously, but so then you just find something else to do with that yarn. And I just feel like the times where I've been in this position of trying to figure out what to knit with specific yarn that I already possess, like, it's always been hard. It's always felt like a weird puzzle that I never managed to solve quite right. I end up losing yarn chicken and having to kind of make sacrifices in a garment that I wouldn't have ideally wanted to make. Or I just have yarn sitting there that I'm like, what am I ever gonna do with this? Should I just give it away? So I'm like, I just need to not buy yarn until I'm actively ready to use it. And of course, the problem with this way of being is that sometimes there's really pretty yarn that you just want to buy. So sometimes I am like, okay, well, let me find the specific project I want to make with that. And that can just be, you know, the next thing in my queue or a couple things down in my queue, but it's this constant push and pull of trying to make sure that queue doesn't get too out of control, and then feeling like I'm too confined having to knit these really specific things for the next like several months of my life. So I don't want a stash. Like, I'm very happy for the people who love having a stash and find it inspiring and like love looking at it and dreaming about what you're gonna make with all of it. That's just not what it feels like to me to have yarn on the shelves, and I just don't want to. Okay, number 9, in the event of a zombie apocalypse, knitting is a genuinely useful skill, and if your friends don't believe you and protect you for it, they deserve it when you get turned into a zombie and then eat them. Okay, because do you think people have central heating in the event of a zombie apocalypse? Do you think people are warm? Do you think that they're well sheltered? No. You know what would be really helpful under those circumstances? The wool sweaters. You can provide them.
Editing Alley, hi. I realized in editing this that these two sections, one after each other, really tie in more than I realized at the time when I was filming, because if I had a stash, that would make me all the better equipped to knit people's sweaters to incentivize them to keep me alive in the event of a zombie apocalypse. So maybe I should reevaluate my stash stance.
Like, is it as useful as my best friend who's an ER nurse? No, obviously not. But if that value is not seen and you are not protected by your friends in the event of a zombie apocalypse, they deserve it when you eat them. Now, somewhat related to this, number 10, I think most scrappy projects are ugly. And I, to be clear, wish that I didn't feel that way. And I think that there are some executions of projects that make use of scrap yarn that are stunning. However, I feel like most of the time that I see people doing projects that are designed to like use up scrap yarn, the ones that I love the most are the ones that weren't actually using scrap yarn. They were like carefully, methodically planned. Like someone chose that whole color palette from scratch for this project. Because I just feel like, unless you've been knitting for a very, very long time, so you have like a huge backlog of scrap yarn, what are the odds that the colors you have available to you like combine in a palette that really like looks great together in the right quantities to put them in the right places in the pattern where they would look best? Like this is the picky person in me again. Like I'm starting to get an amount of scrap yarn in my collection, like leftovers from projects, that I'm like, this is probably now enough to start thinking about what kind of like scrap project I want to do. But I'm just having this problem where I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this. So I've started saving patterns that I do like in theory, because I find most patterns designed for scrappy projects, I just don't even like the pattern as a base. It's just not my style. But then even of the ones I do like, I'm like, I feel like I would only really like this in kind of really specific ways of combining colors. So do I just have to wait until the magical day when I happen to have like a wonderful color palette all together of scrap yarn? I don't. I would love to use up all my scrap yarn in some like crafty, economical way. I'm scared. I'm scared that's gonna be really hard, because I just usually don't like them. Number 11, I think most variegated yarn looks better in the skein than it actually does knit up. And again, this one is very, very down to personal preference. And I've seen so many beautiful projects made out of variegated yarn. I just feel like most of the time that I see a skein of variegated yarn, I'm like, wow, it's beautiful. When I manage to track down what it actually looks like in an actual project, I am disappointed. And again, this is not because it looks bad in that form. It's just that it now suddenly looks a way that is very not to my taste, whereas the way it was wound up in the skein, I was like, ooh, I think this is really pretty. So like I said, nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong with the way it comes out looking, but it is wild to me how often variegated yarn is available for sale without any sample of how it knits up, because I'm like, I just find there to be such a world of difference in how they look that I'm like, how am I possibly supposed to make a decision about whether I want to buy this when I have no idea what it's actually going to look like? And so like when I'm in this position, I will usually go looking on Ravelry to see if the colorway has been used in any projects on Ravelry so I can see it in use. But oftentimes that's not possible, right? Because a lot of times these sorts of colorways are being done by indie dyers. They're often limited runs or operating on pre-orders. So like no one has used it on Ravelry yet. And like there's simply no way to know how it looks knit up. And I just would never buy anything that way. I imagine that a ton of work goes into hand dyeing yarns, and especially variegated yarns. But I just can't imagine that for all of the time that goes into that it's not worth cranking out like a tiny little sample, even on like a knitting machine, just to show how it looks actually knit. But maybe that's not necessary. Like maybe most people are comfortable buying it from a skein. I just feel like I could never. And so I'm always just confused when I can't seem to find any example of how it looks knit up, because it's just so different. Number 12, I don't understand the appeal of test knitting. To be clear, from the tester side, like I think that it's very important in the pattern development process. I just feel like I see such like a clamoring to test knit for patterns, particularly for big designers. And I just don't get it. Like I understand why it's not possible to pay test knitters for the labor that goes into it. I think this is a very murky, tricky part of the pattern design process and just the economics of this as a niche, because like, yeah, any possible profit from a pattern would be completely decimated if you were paying even minimum wage for the number of hours that it takes several people to knit an entire sweater and to give you feedback on it. Like that's thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and extremely few patterns are making that kind of money, even after years on the market. But I just don't understand the appeal, because to me, I'm like, so I get the pattern for free, but like, okay, so I get like an $8 pattern, half of an hour's worth of minimum wage value. Cool. I now have to knit it on a deadline. I have to work from a probably faulty version of the pattern, because the whole purpose of this test knit is to like catch errors, right? Figure stuff out. And I have to like provide that feedback. Like I have to be in dialogue throughout this process about issues that I'm having and actively troubleshooting it to help improve the pattern, which all just sounds to me like a way less fun way to knit. Like I don't, like, is a lot of the appeal of test knitting just trading on the like parasocial relationship between the designer and the tester? Like, is it just an eagerness to be involved in that process? And like, I ask this genuinely, like as someone who hasn't designed any patterns, but I am interested in the idea in theory, and I'm kind of trying to like learn about the process and what that involves. Like, what makes it worth it to you to do a test knit? Like, what do you get out of it? What is the appeal? And I know some test knits, I don't think it's very many, but some will give you a discount on the yarn, or sometimes in really fringe cases, even free yarn, if I think usually the designer is big enough to be able to get a deal with a yarn company. So like in those cases, of course I get it. Like, you're being compensated in a very clear way by getting maybe even like $200 in free yarn. Cool. But like outside of that, what's the deal? Why are we test knitting? I just don't quite get it. But also, as someone who like might someday need to run a test knit, I also kind of feel like I should probably be in some, just to see like what it's like to be in one and experience it from the other side before I try to like put other people in that position. And so I just don't understand. I struggle to understand. Please help me understand. Number 13, I think that we as viewers of Knitting YouTube have a responsibility to intentionally diversify our feeds and therefore the influences that we're exposing ourselves to. I think that particularly if you're a white person, such as myself, I think that especially depending on the context in which you grew up, it can be very easy to accidentally end up in a bubble that just kind of consists of all people who are a lot like you. And I think that can happen both circumstantially and also as a product of the unconscious biases that I think like all of us are just going to be battling and trying to unlearn for the entire rest of our lives. But I think that one of the most important things that we can do in this domain is just pay attention to who we are exposing ourselves to. And so in the context of Knitting YouTube, I mean, like, who are we watching? And I think that there can be a tendency for the algorithm to show you people who are a lot like you. And I'm talking about racial or cultural backgrounds, I'm talking about body size, I'm talking about gender and sexuality, like I'm talking all of these things.
I also should have included here abilities. And like, what a great example of how easy it is to accidentally overlook these things and be like, oh, that's something I should probably be thinking about more in curating my feed.
And why I think it's important to think about this in the context of who we're watching is I think that seeing people represented who come from different life experiences than you is incredibly valuable, and also just like the easiest, laziest way to educate yourself. Like, I think that, you know, it's all well and good to have these grand plans of like, oh, I'm gonna read this important nonfiction book and I'm gonna watch that free online university class and I'm gonna learn all the critical theory and really educate myself. And if you're actually doing that, fantastic. But I think that's a place where sometimes our intentions are a little bit better than our actual follow through. And I think that you can learn a shocking amount from just exposing yourself to people who are different from you and just listening to what they have to say. Like, I truthfully think that 90% of my learning in terms of like social issues has just come through like cultural osmosis of just like putting myself in a position to hear from people. Because like, even if it's as something as apparently niche and focused as a knitting podcast, like life always creeps in. You always get little bits of added perspective and different life experiences. When we exist in very homogenous bubbles, we tend to dehumanize people who don't fit within that bubble. This is why so many people's minds open if they leave home and like move to a city or go to university. Like, just putting yourself in a position to listen to people who are going to have different experiences than you makes such a difference. And in traditional media, there's like a gatekeeping issue here, right? So we can advocate for more representation, but we're still kind of limited to like what gets produced and what is available to us. But when we're watching YouTube, there's no gatekeeper like that. So there are knitting podcasters from all walks of life, and we can go find them. And this is not me telling you to search up a bunch of podcasts and subscribe and then like never actually watch them, because turns out they're just actually like not quite your vibe and you're just not into it. Like, That's not helping anybody. So what I would say is just like when you see a new knitting podcast recommended to you, maybe there's a podcast there that you wouldn't have instinctively clicked on. It's not immediately like, oh, that's for me. But maybe just give it a chance and see. And like if you try that a handful of times, you will find channels that you like that are also broadening your worldview at the same time. I also did a video about knitting podcasts that I recommend, so I will drop the link to that in the description if you want to check it out. So yeah, I think that if you look at your subscription feed and find that the people that you follow are all pretty similar, I think it's really not that hard to do something about that, and there is a ton of value in doing that.
I also just remembered that I would like to shout out in this section the YouTube channel All Homesteading, who did a really fantastic video all about BIPOC representation in knitting. So that's something that I definitely recommend for further viewing on this topic.
Now, number 14 is kind of related to that because anytime I bring up things that might be considered political on the channel, I always get a few people who are angry about it. And often these are phrased through the lens of like, I am not here watching a knitting podcast to hear about politics. I am here for escapism. I don't want that in my knitting. So my controversial opinion is I'm not here to provide that level of escapism. I do think that I'm here to provide a level of relaxation and comfort for sure. I think that is something that is really important for me when I'm consuming knitting podcasts. But I know for me, when I think of the content that is most relaxing and soothing to me when I'm stressed about the state of the world, it's not the content that doesn't at all acknowledge the state of the world. It's actually the content that acknowledges it sort of briefly in passing in like a wink wink, we're in this together sort of way. Like in order for me to feel safe to escape with someone on their channel, I want to feel like we're escaping together from the same thing, you know? So that's why for me, I don't ever get very in depth into these things, but I will drop little bits and pieces here and there. I think that if you watch my content, you can pretty easily discern where my politics lie in a way that I hope is also comforting to you if you feel similarly to me in terms of like, I can't escape fully with you unless I really know that we're escaping together. I think there's also an element to me where like knitting is not an apolitical act. I watched a really great video recently. I cannot remember who the creator was. I will link it below, but talking about like knitting as a radical political act. And that is really interesting to me because that is more, I guess, how it feels to me. Because to me, knitting is not a trad wifey hobby. Knitting is a way that I lean into slow fashion and divest from fast fashion. It's a way that I take control over the labor practices involved in the production of my garments. And like, obviously I'm not making all of my clothes, but it's a move in that direction. I can choose to produce those things using materials that I know were produced in a way that I feel comfortable with the ethics of that. Even if that's not something that's accessible to you, you still know that the treatment of the human who produced your clothes was good, which is more than we can say for a lot of things we could buy at the mall, right? So I think that knitting has a lot of value from like a sustainability and ethics and sort of not anti-capitalism, obviously, because you are like buying yarn, but you're I guess like engaging in capitalism in a more sort of reluctant and roundabout and like critical way. So I guess I just really don't think of knitting as like escapist in that way. So my channel just can't be. Okay, lastly, number 15, we should prototype things more. So let me explain what I mean by this. So I think that as people in general, really, but also like particularly in the hobby of knitting, we have a tendency to buy things that we see and go, that seems like a great idea. I need that. We buy it and then we never use it. Like often very quickly after we acquire something, some truth about the reality of this product reveals itself to us in a way that we go, oh, that actually like doesn't really work for me or my process or my habits or whatever it is. And we very quickly realize this wasn't a good purchase. I didn't need to have this. And a lot of waste comes from that. And I think that if we stop and think for a second, I think that we can actually avoid a lot of that waste if we just like prototype the idea a little. So like, let me give you a case study. I, for example, have little foam stitch stoppers that go at the ends of my knitting needles. These seemed like a really great idea, right? I can throw my project in the knitting bag without worrying about whether it's gonna like slide off. I never use them, like ever. Like I've had them for over 2 years. I've probably put them on needles maybe 10 times. And I don't mean like 10 projects that I've used them on consistently. I mean like individual times. Like that day I finished my knitting and I put the stitch stoppers on. I simply don't use them. And I could have avoided these stupid little foam things from existing needlessly as waste in the world if I had just tested the idea. Would I put something at the end of my needles after I finish a project? Would I do that? I could test that with so many things. I could just wind up a little tiny ball of yarn, stick that on the end of the needles. I could wad up some masking tape, shove that on the end of the needle. Like, so many things could you shove on the end of a needle to see if you will put something on the ends of your needles? Because the answer is I don't, and they're a waste. So that's an example of one where I didn't prototype. To give you an example of where I did prototype, I did a lot of that starting up this channel. Like, here's me in my very first episode explaining how I'm filming, having bought absolutely nothing to make this happen. I wish that I could show you how very makeshift this setup is right now. We're recording this on an iPhone from 2020, so shout out to the iPhone 11 Pro. We'll see how you do. I have my laptop over here, screen mirrored from my phone so that I can see what my phone is recording, because I'm using the back camera on my phone because it has the better camera. The phone is sitting on top of an upside down plant pot, which itself is sitting on top of a piano. So we're making it work with what we've got. I didn't want to go and buy a bunch of stuff to film with, not knowing whether this would be something that I would continue to do. And even now, I mean, I've been doing this over a year and it's something that I currently have no plans to stop doing, but I'm still very slowly and very reluctantly investing in new things for the channel. My tripod is still sitting on top of a book to get it to be the right height. And so over time, I'm investing in things that I have proven a use for, as I have felt that my sort of prototype setup has proven to me that I'll actually use it. So like, as an example, my first investment that I made for the channel was a clamp to go around my phone so that I could use my actual tripod that I already had rather than having to lean my phone against the books. But I filmed that way for a few videos before I did that because I wanted to prototype the idea of me doing this. I think that often the things we buy that end up being a complete waste are things that we buy not for ourselves as we actually exist, but for our like fantasy self, right? So like, as an example, if you have decided in your mind, my knitting projects, my yarn stash, whatever it is out of control. It's out of control. I need to buy like a nice bin. It'll be a nice bin that sits in the corner of my living room. And I'll put my projects in there when I'm done with them for the day so that they're like stored away in a way that's nice and like not everywhere. And that genuinely might be a really wonderful solution for you. But my suggestion is before you go buy the expensive, cute, fancy bin, try out this idea with some random, ugly bin, vessel, something you can temporarily repurpose from somewhere else in your house and put it in the corner that you want to put your fancy basket in and just see if you will put your projects in it at the end of the night. Because maybe you will, but maybe that's only a thing that your aspirational self would do and your actual self is not going to actually do that at the end of the night. And you can actually save yourself the like $50 you were going to spend on this cute basket at HomeSense. Just try it first. If you hear people talking about the idea of reading while knitting, and you're like, wow, I would like to try that. I should go buy one of those nice like book prop up things with the pillow so it's nice and cozy and holds my book up perfectly for me. Pause. Maybe try rigging up a setup with some pillows and kind of carefully balancing the book in your lap. Pro tip, this works much better with like floppy paperbacks if you don't have something to hold it in place or you don't happen to be like perfectly in the middle of a hardcover book. And just see, do you actually like reading while knitting? Is this a thing you're actually going to do? And it's going to be worth it to you to invest in this item. If so, yes, great. If not, again, congratulations, you just saved yourself a butt ton of money. So yeah, I think we need to prototype more. If you have an idea of something you want to buy that is in some way tied to you behaving in a new way, try it out first. I feel like in the world of knitting and crafting hobbies in general, it's so easy to find more cute little things to try out and see like, oh, is this better? Is that better? I want to try this, I want to try that. And just sometimes we don't have to. Sometimes we can save ourselves money by just trying out a makeshift version of it first. Okay, those are all my controversial opinions for you today. Hopefully you're still here and you didn't unsubscribe because you're mad at me. But if you're still here, I'd love to know in the comments what your controversial opinions are. And if you'd like to be here next time, I hope that you'll consider subscribing if you're not already, though if you already are, you're my favorite. And I'll see you next time.